Taia te kōrero, taia te wānangi, taia te pai wao, kia uru mai rā koutou, ki roto ki te whare kōrero e tū. Nei, tenei te pō, nau mai te ao. E te iwi kia ora katoa tātou I roto I tēnei pō. Kia ora everybody, Che Wilson here from Che's channel, Te Pai Waho, with number 5 Taite Talks. And really pleased to introduce our Manuhiri for tonight. And I'm handing over to the lovely Piki Knap. Nō reira kei te taihene Piki, tēnā koe. I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce who you are. Kei a koe.
Oh, tēnā koe, Che. Kia ora koutou, ko Piki Knap tōku ingoa no te kuiti ahau, engari kei kirikiri ro e noho ana. I te taha o tōku mama no Ngāti Maniapoto, I te taha o tōku papa no Ngāti Rangi me Ngāti Rangi Nui. Kia ora koutou.
Tēnā koe. So kia ora Piki. So I've known Piki for a little while now, and I was honoured to have her in our wedding party. Piki was the matron of honour for Missy. And she probably knows too many secrets about Missy, but anyway, that's another story. But really good to have you on, Piki. And we're going to get straight into it. I'm going to hand it over to Piki to ask a few questions, and we'll see where we go with the conversation tonight.
Ai, ka pai. So I've got a couple of questions around, all things Te Ao Māori. But one of my burning questions, which is quite topical for me at the moment, is related to Tonguey and preparing for Tonguey. And people, there's a revival of woven coffins. And so, there's preparation that needs to go happen before the person's actually died. So I guess just wondering what your views are around prepping for for a nihu, and where do you store these types of things, in your garage, or I mean, it's a little bit morbid to like prepare in advance. And I actually don't know what the tikanga is around this, because it's kind of a more recent thing, I suppose.
Yeah, kia ora. That's a really good question, Piki. I think the most important thing is that Te Ao Māori continues to evolve. And as Te Ao Māori evolves, we have to pivot as a people. Yeah. And part of that is there are some things we may not have done in the last 50 years. But just because we haven't done them in the last 50 years doesn't mean to say that we didn't do them before that. Yeah. And I say the last 50 years because it was about the 50s, 60s, probably definitely the 1960s for Te Ao Māori, where we started to follow the American style funeral. And that American style funeral where the embalming happened, and before that, very rarely did Māori bodies get embalmed, and they probably weren't actually embalmed until the 1980s, because I still remember being at Tonguey and they go, they had to get embalmed, where it was still a big thing in the 1980s. Otherwise, I've got vague memories of smelling the honga in the tent.
Yeah,
body.
Yeah.
But to your specific question, some people call the flax woven vessels a kahu whakatere, a tōpaki, and a few other variations. And there's a number of ways to do them. So what you can do is have a woven mat, which you just use all the time, and or for special occasions, and it's just a woven mat. And then you can later on add to it if you choose, actually, we're going to use it to save time to create the vessel to carry the body. So that's one option, where it's just the mat and then you choose to add to it. And therefore, if it's just a mat, it's a mat, and you're just using it as a mat until such time as, and that cuts down a few hours as well. I've spoken to some people, and if they're preparing the body themselves, it can take up to 6 hours. And if you've got a good team of weavers of, say, 6 weavers who are pro weavers, they can also weave something at about a similar amount of time, gathering the flax and weaving, and then they do all of the extra finalizing bits during the rest of the Tonguey.
Yeah.
So there's a whole range of ways you can do this. If you actually get a tōpaki woven up in advance, there's the whole issue where people say he karanga mate, that you're putting on death by preparing for these things. And really, I think whānau have to have a conversation and put up some parameters around tapu and noa, and make it work for yourselves. You know, there's people who now make their own coffins as well, you know, Western style coffins. And so you've also got to just be practical in your application and how you do your own separation of tapu and noa. And you may not you may not be bothered by that, but the moment you have a visitor who is, your visitor may leave.
Yeah.
And so it's important to note all of these different things and the challenges that you may be confronted with. So hopefully that's helped give you some form of response. Kia ora, Auntie Wyatt. I can see my aunt online.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I have a friend at the moment, and they're preparing for, for a Tonguey that's coming, and probably not far away, in terms of would be within months. But the question's always around, around that calling a mate to the family, and it might not be the one that they're preparing for. So the storage issue came up because they didn't want to put it where the mokopuna would see it. So you've got to consider all of those things, where you're going to store it, and what conversations go on in the whānau around that. No, that was
well, and you've just got to find a practical solution, because we're continuing to enter into new spaces, and as we enter into those new spaces, we've got to make them work.
How bye. So that's a random question that I sort of just thought about 5 minutes ago for you. This is a conversation that I've been having. But the other one that I wanted to raise was around hui, AGMs, our trusts, our Māori organisations and AGMs, and particularly in this time, and them being virtual, and sort of the expectation that we should be having kanohi ki te kanohi, even though you've got these alert levels and restrictions around you. So that's something that we've been challenged with recently, and it raises a whole heap of questions from whānau around should we be doing that, or should we just do our own thing and ignore the rules?
That's a really good point. And if we look at COVID and iwi response generally to COVID, iwi te ao Māori response to COVID, I think the reason why we responded so quickly and extremely well is because we know the reality that we were the ones that suffered the most the last time.
Yeah.
And it's too easy for us to just get relaxed and go, oh, sweet as, it's not real, and come up with these theories that it's a 5G tower that's created the sickness or something like that. But I was part of an AGM on Sunday for ngā tangata tiaki o te awa Wanganui, and the Wanganui River post-settlement governance entity. And what we did is we had it online, but we also had 4 hubs, one in Wanganui, one up the river at Rānana, one in Taumarunui, and one in Ohakune, for those whānau that might not have devices to meet in person.
Yeah.
In Ohakune, there were 7 of us. In Taumarunui, there were 20. Not sure how many were in Rānana and in town, but it worked. It worked, and I think that we have to move with the times and be relevant, and infuse our wairua Māori, our tikanga Māori, into these various hui.
Aye. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Pardon?
How do you think you'd do it?
Oh, I think in hindsight we would have done a similar thing. I think for our trust, it was the first time we'd even considered a virtual meeting, let alone, the logistics of it. But the hubs would be, or even like whānau hubs would have been a better approach to say to whānau, please get a cluster of whānau together at a house that has a device or internet connection, and live stream in or Zoom in to the AGM, so that you're considering the connection issue as well as our kaumātua or people that may have issues around technology, and being able to access and participate. And then having hubs at marae maybe. All our marae have, well, most of them will have access to internet. So, doing it that way, and maybe having that as a future model, we would probably get more engagement at our AGMs, or more people interested in them. But I must say the upside to virtual is that they were very short. It was a very short meeting, but it takes away that interaction and all those questions and comments that come off the floor, and interesting stuff that that whānau like to raise, even if it's not the kaupapa of the day.
What the way we dealt with questions is that they could put them up in the Q&A section of the webinar.
Yeah.
And where we could answer them straight away, we did. Otherwise, if they wanted more detail, we committed to writing to them within a certain period.
Oh, good.
And then also we had to vote on a couple of things, like auditor and all of that. And so individual devices, one vote. If you had registered and said that you're going to have 3 whānau members, you had to put their name in to confirm that they're registered.
Yeah.
Then that device got 3. And at the hubs, there was staff for each of them, so that the staff were the independent person who could count the votes.
Oh, yeah. And report that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, it worked. And the thing is that we're still making it up and learning as we go. I've got a question for you, actually, Piki.
Yeah.
You're somebody who lives away from the tribal area, not too far. It's only an hour.
Yeah.
But you're very active, from my perspective, at least. Not just through your mahi with the land trusts and that, but also just with the marae and the whānau. And what's your tips to people watching tonight who are wanting to know how to connect
with home, with their marae? I guess for me, it's probably easy for me because I don't have children to look after, so
Yeah.
so it gives me the ability to be able to go back and forwards and pretty much do what I want. But that's not really an excuse. If I had babies, they'd probably be coming with me. For me, I stay connected, both financially and in person. So, I'm always of the view that that we should contribute to our marae financially if we can afford it. So that's the easiest way to stay connected, is to have a regular contribution to the marae, and that koha, helps them to stay sustainable. I guess having been connected to whānau down there, Dad's back home, so I make a point of going to visit him at least once a week, and I'll try to get work at home so that I can do that, and it's part of my mahi as well as staying connected. But even if I wasn't working there, I'd probably be home most weekends, catching up, and I'm quite nosy as well, so I want to know what's happening. I mean, you have your auntie connections, and so you sort of touch base with the aunties and the cousins and see what's happening. And Facebook makes that much easier because you can just go online and see, what the drama of the day is. But so that technology does help. I'm always trying to get people always trying to rope me into being on, a trustee or on the committee or the marae, but I've always kind of held back from that because that is quite a big commitment. But that doesn't mean that I won't support them in whatever way I can. But yeah, I mean, staying connected, that's financial, that's in person. And you don't have to be there every week. You could do it once a month, or and just being connected through technology with your whānau. Yeah.
It's interesting, because there's a few marae that I don't connect enough to, and therefore I'll put a contribution in once a quarter to those marae. It's only small, but it's one way of me maintaining my responsibility back to those marae and remembering all of the hard work of those families that are there cleaning the toilets and everything else.
Yeah, that's right.
Got a few comments coming into where people appreciating those tips you've given, Piki, and also some comments that have talked about carvers who have done a coffin in 2 days, Drew. And so, and some people will do things differently, in the islands. They will often just rent the coffin.
Oh.
And then when they go to the urupa,
right.
When they go to the urupa, they take the body out and wrap the body in tapa.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a whole range of different options, I think, as we look forward. Do you have another question?
Actually, my other question, that's going back to the Tonguey, is we're getting strapped for land, and at some point in the future we're going to have to think about how we bury, or how we send our whānau off, in terms of are they going to be cremated? Are they going to be liquefied? Are they you're going to have a big tree orchard or something like that? I don't know, but there will come a time where we're going to run out of land.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where we have to have some really key discussions. And our master's program, we had a we had a discussion around water cremations. And so water cremations is this process where you use alkaline water, and it takes all of the kiko off your bones, and it all just becomes liquid, and it just leaves the bones. And we went through a conversation, and we identified what are the key parts to what are the key parts to this water cremation? And alkaline something or other it's called. Alkaline liquefaction, I think. Yeah. And what was this? So what are the key points? The wairua, you tuku the wairua. When you pass on, the mauri goes back to the takiwā, and your body, the kiko of your body goes back to the whenua. And if you wish, you then hahu later on to retrieve the bones and put them in a special place. And so if all of those things are covered, technically, it might work. The most important thing is that whatever option people choose, you just have to have a kōrero with your family.
Yeah, that's right.
And so however people are going to do interment later on, you've got to work through that with your whānau and not just leave them with a shock decision beforehand. You've got to process it to make it work for your whānau, because we are losing land, and you just got to make it work. And the other thing is there are a lot of urupā where some of them are just the big urupā for everybody. And so some whānau might have to actually, because what's happened is some marae have become iwi marae. And your whānau may connect to that marae, or they might be actually just connected to that rohe, that takiwā, that little district. And you might have your own land somewhere else where your actual marae used to be, but it was pulled down and you all amalgamated at another place. And so those whānau might need to have conversations about going back to their whenua and establish a new urupā so that people are going back there. So there's a range of options, and we just got to be practical about it, eh?
Yeah, definitely. I like talking about yeah, because that's what people don't like talking about.
Well, it's funny, because so do I. I always go to my relations. So, where are you getting buried? So I know whether I've got to fight for you or not.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a valid question. Like I always think about that with my dad. Mum's side will fight to keep him in Manuhiri, but his wishes are to go home. So, I know that at that time, I know what his wishes are, but it'll be a big scrap with my own whānau to get him home. So, those are things that you do need to talk about. The other thing, I'm leading into a discussion I had with Hene around having a tangi box, and that's around all of your, what happens to all your things afterwards, to stop family fighting over all your things. I mean, she would need it because she has, rooms full of taonga that have to be divided up.
This is the thing, is that you've got to have those conversations early. And I'm of the opinion the key whānau taonga have to go through the female line.
Oh, okay. Why is that?
So that the in-law doesn't end up taking it. Because that happens. And especially with the law, there's some really stupid things that happen with the law, because the law is the law. The law isn't necessarily right. It's just the law. And key whānau taonga, I think, should stay through a female line. Or if it does go through the male line, you've got to make sure it doesn't end up with the in-laws.
Yeah.
And if you're going to give key taonga through the female line, then you've got to make sure you can give taonga to your male issues as well.
Yeah.
And you just got to balance it all out and teach people responsibility rather than entitlement.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right.
And because you can't stop greed.
Yeah.
You know, people are just going to be greedy and egocentric, or they're not, and you just got to work through that.
Yep.
Bueno.
Oh.
Oh, well, tēnā ka Piki. There's been some interesting comments tonight. People have appreciated it. Just want to thank you for tonight. And e te iwi, next week we'll have a new Manuhiri. And as you can see already, Tuesday will be my normal co-host sessions, and next Thursday we'll have a new Manuhiri for Taite Talks. Tēnei ka mihi atu ki a koe Piki, o te rā koutou katoa e mātakitaki mai ana. Tēnei ka mihi atu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Pō mārire.
Pō mārire.